Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles in 2 different sections. In the analysis part, we'll first have a discussion with respect to the debate on delimitation taking place across the country and the way forward. Then, in the second article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the growing importance of the new oil, that is, the critical minerals. Then, in the simplified section, we'll have a discussion with respect to 5 different articles from a special perspective of UPSC Prelims 2025, along with the value addition. So stay tuned. Now, coming to the very first article of the day, this is with respect to lines of power, understanding delimitation. Now, for years, we have been hearing this debate with respect to the prospective delimitation which is to be carried out. Now, here the bone of contention or the point of debate is the basis of delimitation, that is the population. So many states have fear in their mind since they basically implemented a lot of population control measures, and in comparison, relatively to the northern Indian states, they have controlled their population. So they have their fear in their mind that if the current numbers are used for delimitation, they might be at a disadvantageous position. It is in this regard that you have the Union Home Minister who has given a sort of an assurance to these southern states that they will not be affected by the delimitation exercise and would get their rightful share if the number of Lok Sabha seats were to be increased, as said by the Union Home Minister. So we'll see what this delimitation process is all about, what are the constitutional provisions, what are the issues, and what can be the way forward. Now, this is a very important part of the syllabus with respect to the Indian Constitution. Now, let's first talk about what do we mean by delimitation. But before that, let's study about a very common generic term which you must have heard, which is constituency. So what do we mean by a constituency? See, a constituency refers to a particular area with a specific set of people, specific number of people who basically elect their representatives. Now, either you can have, for example, a constituency for the Lok Sabha, or you can have a constituency for a legislative assembly in a particular state. So if you just look at this particular map of India, we have the electoral constituencies of the 2019 Lok Sabha election. So they are in total 543, right? General elections to the Lok Sabha. And if you just look at this particular map, this represents the constituencies with respect to the legislative assembly in the UP, right? So you can just see that there are numbers which are written. They basically tell us the numbers or the specific constituencies in different areas. So in total, you have 403 constituencies in the legislative assembly of UP. Now, what do we mean by delimitation? I already told you what do we mean by a constituency. So the process of basically fixing the number of seats and the boundaries, that is the territorial boundaries of these constituencies for each state, right? That is what we call as delimitation. Now, this delimitation can be either for the Lok Sabha or it can be either for that particular legislative assembly, right? So what do we mean? So it basically means the process of the fixation of the number of seats in a particular state, right? And the alteration or the fixation of the territorial boundaries in that particular state with respect to the constituencies. Now, why do we need delimitation? That is the very first question. We always say that we believe in the principle of one citizen, one vote, one value. So in order to manifest, in order to basically convert this principle into reality, we have the delimitation which is carried out. Now, is there any constitutional provision which talks about the delimitation? Yes. So we have Article 82 and 170 subclause 3, which talks about the readjustment of the electoral constituencies on the basis of census, right? So Article 82 talks about the House of the People, that is the Lok Sabha, and Article 170 subclause 3 talks about the Legislative Assembly, that is the readjustment of the seats on the basis of the census. Now, reserved seats, whenever we talk about the reserved seats for the scheduled tribes and the scheduled castes, what you must know is that we have the constitutional provision. We have Article 330 and we have Article 332. So 330 talks about the House of the People, the reservation of SCs and STs, the seats for the SCs and STs in the House of the People. And then we have the reservation for the SCs and STs in the legislative assemblies. So we have Article 332. Now, what you must know is that the basis, the fixation of the number of seats for the SCs and STs is done through the delimitation also, right? So this is what you have to keep in mind. Now, why this is a news? Because look, what the Constitution says is that we would be going with the delimitation on the basis of the first census, which is to be carried out after 2026. So ideally, it should be 2031 census. But again, here is a crux. what you must know is that the government already delayed the census 2021. One of the reasons was natural because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and then there were delays on the part of the government. So what we are having the situation right now is that we are looking for a possible census, right, which can take place, and on that basis, the government can basically do the delimitation. So this is the whole picture. Now, who performs the delimitation? So what you must know is that we have a specific body which is created through an act of the parliament, what we call as the Delimitation Commission. Now you would ask that who all are the members of the Delimitation Commission? So you have a retired Supreme Court judge, you have the Chief Election Commissioner, and you have the respective state election commissioners. Now if you just look at this particular press note. Now this is with respect to the Delimitation Commission, which was basically established in 2002. Now this, it comprises of, if you can just see, Mr. Justice Kuldeep Singh, then you have the election commissioner, and then you have the state election commissioners of all the states, right? So this is basically the composition of Delimitation Commission. It's basically a government press note, right? Now, how many times the Delimitation Commission has been institutionalized? So it has been basically institutionalized 4 times. That is in the year 1952, 62, 72, and 2002. Now again, the basis on which the Delimitation Commission works is that of Article 81, which primarily says that the redistribution or the rationalization or the readjustment of the seats, it's to be carried out keeping in mind that the ratio between that number, that is the number of the seats which are given to a particular state, and the population of the state is so far as practical the same for all state. So it is trying to basically project that parity aspect among different states. Now please understand, if population is used as a basis for the delimitation, for the rationalization and the redistribution of the seats, don't you think that those states which have more population would get more number of seats? That is the one aspect. But again, there have been many states in the country, primarily the South Indian states, who have worked a lot with respect to the population control measures. So instead of incentivizing them, what we are doing, if we are giving more number of seats to those states which have seen more population explosion, what we are doing is we are actually disincentivizing those states who have worked upon the population control measures. That is what the crux is, right? So we are basically disincentivizing the population control strategies taken by different states. Now, keeping this thing in mind, what happened in the year 1976 was that through the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act, it said that the total number of seats would be frozen till 2000. Right? So we will not basically increase the number of seats which are to be given to different states, because we want to incentivize those states who have basically performed well on population control strategies. Now, the number of seats was basically on the basis of 1971 census. What you must know is that at that particular point of time, the population of the country was 54.8 crores, right? And on an average, per Lok Sabha seat, you had almost 10.1 lakh people, right? So this was the average number of people representing per MP, right? Every MP. Now, again, what we saw through the 84th Constitutional Amendment Act was that this frozen part, this freeze on the number of seats, total number of seats, was extended till 2026. But one thing was basically added over here. What it said that was that though we will keep the number of seats, the total number of seats same, but we'll go with the readjustment and rationalization. That is, inter se, we would have the readjustment, but again, the total number of seats would be fixed, right? And that would be on the basis of 1991 census. And it was also applicable when we talk about giving adequate number of seats, reserving adequate number of seats for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Then we had the 87th Constitutional Amendment Act, which also said that this readjustment and rationalization is to be on the basis of 2001 census and not 1991 census. So what you must keep in mind is that in 1976, the total number of seats were basically frozen, and that was capped at 543, and still we have the same number of seats. The total number of seats is fixed, that is 543, right? And inter se, the readjustment has taken place through the 84th Constitutional Amendment Act and the 87th Constitutional Amendment Act. That is what you need to know. Also, if I were to give you the importance of Delimitation Commission from the perspective of UPSC, just look at this particular question of 2024. How many Delimitation Commissions have been constituted by the government till December 2023, right? One thing which you must know is that once the Delimitation Commission comes with a particular order, right, that order cannot be challenged in any court of law. That is the one thing. Second, that particular order is placed before the House, that is placed before the Parliament or the State Legislative Assembly, State Legislature. But one thing what you must remember is that neither the Parliament nor the state legislatures can basically tinker with the modifications of the Delimitation Commission. And therefore, let's look at this 2012 prelims question. It says, with reference to the Delimitation Commission, consider the following statements. The orders of the Delimitation Commission cannot be challenged in a court of law. Absolutely correct. When the orders of the Delimitation Commission are laid before the Lok Sabha or the State Legislative Assembly, they cannot effect any modification in the orders. This is also correct. So over here, which of the statements is or are above correct? So we have both 1 and 2, right? And over here, in this particular question asked in 2024, the answer would be 4, right? Now, what is the significance of delimitation? The very first, as I told in the beginning, is fair representation. We want that the representation should be fair. What we mean is that every person who's basically casting his vote, that person should have an equal value. Right? All the persons must have equal value with respect to the vote cast by them. And that is the reason the delimitation ensures that this particular aspect is fulfilled and therefore fair representation is ensured. Next is equity. What we are trying to say is that whenever we are talking about the delimitation aspect, it is focusing upon the distribution of different seats across the country. And therefore, this ensures equity in the distribution of seats. And again, this would basically make sure that the underrepresentation doesn't happen or the overrepresentation doesn't happen. There has to be an equity with respect to the representation part. Next is reserved seat for SCs and STs. What we are trying to do is we have this constitutional mandate to reserve the seats, fixed number of seats for the SCs and the STs. Now, if you have a particular delimitation which is carried out on the basis of the census, you know that how many SCs or STs are there in which part of the country, and accordingly, you can have the set number of seats reserved for those people. And this would ensure that the kind of historical injustices which basically this particular community suffered, they can be done away with by providing them the adequate incentives. Next aspect is that of federalism. So what we're trying to say is that also, as said by the Supreme Court in the very famous S.R. Bomai versus Union of India, where the Supreme Court said that federalism as a principle is a part of the very basic structure of the Constitution. So what we are trying to say is that the different constituent units, when we talk about the state government, they should have equitable power with them, right? It should not be like that some states are at disadvantaged position and the other states are at advantage position. So we need to have a kind of equity, right? A level playing field has to be provided to all the states with respect to the exercise of their political power and also to maintain the harmony among different regions of the country. Next is population control measure. Now this becomes important. What we are trying to say is, see, initially in 1976 through the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act, we thought to basically freeze the total number of seats. And again, right now, so many years have passed. But what we are seeing is that still you have this disparity. The very objective was, the first, to incentivize the South Indian states for their population control measures, and second, to basically disincentivize the North Indian states or those states which were having the population explosion, so that they can have adequate policies and then they can also stem down the population growth. But what we have seen even after many years is that this has not actually resulted into the kind of objectives which the government had, right? So again, this delimitation exercises raises question about the effectiveness and the implications of this particular policy of freezing the total number of seats. So therefore, we need to have some other alternatives. We need to go with some other solutions which can possibly address the concerns of the South Indian states and also incentivize the North Indian states to basically have more tough or basically more effective population control measures. What are the concerns related to the delimitation? The very first is disparity in representation. Now, if you just look at the two tables which are given in front of you, the first table says that if the delimitation is carried out with respect to fixing the total number of seats to 543 and reapportioning among the different states based upon their population. That is, total number of seats are being fixed, but we are basically readjusting on the basis of the population of different states. So what it says is that we have UP. We have the UP. Now just look, we have 4 states, UP, Bihar, Rajasthan and MP. What the author is trying to say in this particular, through this particular table is that if we keep the total number of seats constant, and if we just go on the basis of the kind of population which different states have, and if we just do the readjustment, then there would be a substantial increase in the number of seats to UP. Given to the UP, or let's say take the case of Bihar, or take the case of Rajasthan or Madhya Pradesh. On the other hand, what we would see is that if we keep the total number of seats constant, and if we basically readjust the seats, definitely we'll have many sort of disadvantages being faced by the South Indian states in the form of reduction of the total number of seats. Look at this. Kerala would lose almost 8 seats. From 20, it would transition to 12. From 28, Karnataka would transition to 26, right? Just imagine, in comparison to states like UP, let's say it would have 91 seats, and Kerala would have only 12 seats. Karnataka would have only 26 seats. So obviously, this is something which is quite concerning for these states, especially the South Indian states. Now, second, in the table second, what the author is trying to say is that if we just also increase the total number of seats, that is, if the total number of seats are also increased based upon the population projections of 2025, and if the total number of seats is increased to 848, now here we are talking about the House of the People. I hope you are clear with that, right? That is a Lok Sabha. Now, UP would see an increase from 80 to that of 143. So there would be an increase of 63, right? Then Bihar would see an increase of 39 seats, right? The total number of seats would be 79. Then Rajasthan would transition from 25 to 50, almost double, right? MP would see again from 29 to 52, a gain of almost 23. Look at this. For these 4 states, please understand, for these 4 states, the total gain is too much in the number of seats. But just see, for Kerala, it would remain same. Even if the number of seats is increasing from 543 to 848, substantial increase, but even then Kerala would have the same number. Let's talk about Karnataka. From 28 it would transition to 41, right? The increase is better than that of Kerala. Then for Punjab it would be from 13 to 18, just an increase of 5 seats. Look at this, increase for UP is almost 63, increase for Bihar is almost 39, right? Also look at this particular chart which is provided in the Indian Express today, which also points towards the same picture. See, the very objective of giving you this information or this analogy is to make it clear that what are the concerns being faced by the South Indian states. Now, the 1971 census put India's population as 54.8 crores. So per seat, that is per Lok Sabha seat, you had an average representation of almost 10.1 lakh people, right? Now, what this particular table is trying to say is that if we keep this ratio same, if we keep this ratio of representation at 10.1 lakh people being represented by a particular member of Parliament, right? So what it would mean is that in total we would require almost 1400 seats. We would require 1400 seats in Lok Sabha, right? And again, seats which would go to UP would increase to almost 250. For Bihar, it would increase to 169, right? For Kerala, it would just be 36. Just imagine, you are keeping this ratio constant from 10, that is from the census 1971. And if you were to give the same number, if you were to keep the same ratio, and then if you were to give the seats to the states of UP or Bihar or any other seats, see the substantive jump in the number of seats. Right? So it would be, current seats is 85, right? So what you are transitioning is to 250. Then for Bihar, you are transitioning from 54 to 169. And for Kerala, you're just increasing from 20 to 36. If the ratio is to be kept at 15 lakh, that is per member of parliament, that person is actually representing on an average 15 lakh people. So the total number of seats would then be 168 for UP. For Kerala, it would be just 24. So in comparison to 168, 24 is nothing, right? So this is what the issue is. This is what the issue is. That is what the kind of fear which the states in the South India are having. Now, again, as I said, it is primarily between the northern and the southern part of the India. The basis is the population. The bone of contention is that if you take population as the basis for the readjustment of the seats, for the allocation of seats, then that is going to have a problem. Now, this regards the progress made by the southern states. Obviously, so you have states like Kerala, you have states like Tamil Nadu who have substantially invested in the human capital, be it health, be it education, and therefore they got the result. They got the result in the form of control in the overall population, right? So this has to be incentivized. But if you are having the population, the current population numbers as the base for the delimitation, this is not something which would incentivize them. This would actually incentivize those states which basically saw the population explosion. Now, next aspect is aspect of federalism, as we just discussed. So the distribution of political power between various political entities, what we're talking about is the states, has to be equal. You should give adequate importance to different states, right? There cannot be a disparity between the political power exercised by one state and the other. Next is the share in the country's GDP. So the southern states only have a percentage of 18% of the total population, right? Their share in the overall population is just 18%. But when you talk about their contribution in the overall GDP, it tunes to more than 35%, right? So they're having good proportion in the country's overall development. Next is disproportionate benefit to the northern states. So this would, through this, what would happen is that the political power would shift to the northern states, and therefore it would give disproportionate advantage to the northern states. Next is inadequate funding. See, you must be knowing that we have the Constitution of the Finance Commission, and the article is 280, and that Finance Commission basically gives the recommendation with respect to the distribution of the net proceeds of taxes between the center and the states and among the different states. One of the most important parameters which is considered by the Finance Commission is the population. So for example, we had the 14th Finance Commission, which basically took into consideration the population of 1971 and the 2001 census, right? 2011, sorry, right? Similarly, you had the 15th Finance Commission, which also took into consideration the population numbers with respect to the census. Now, it is but obvious that if you will be having the dependence upon the latest numbers of census, that would mean that more resources would go to those states which have higher number of people. Definitely, Finance Commission is also considering other parameters. I'm not negating that. But again, if you have even a particular factor which is of substantive weightage in the overall number of factors and which gives importance to the current numbers, this can be disadvantageous for the southern states, right? So we have the devolution of funds, which is the recommendation is given by the Finance Commission, and that can possibly lead to the disparity. Next is affecting the reservation for SCs and STs. Again, what we see is that if you have the current population numbers being considered for the reservation of the SCs and STs, so that can also basically shift the political power with respect to the SCs or STs per se. That can also have an effect, right? Affect the distribution of seats for the reserved. Now, what are the international practices related to the delimitation? So, for example, we have the House of Representatives in the US, which is analogous to the Lok Sabha in India. Now, over there, the total number of seats, it is capped at 435. Again, what you must know is that the population has basically increased 4 times from 1911 to 2020, almost 4 times, but still the total number of seats is capped at 435, and the seats among the states are redistributed after every census through the method of equal proportion. And what it ultimately leads to is that even if some states are actually witnessing more population growth than the other states, that actually doesn't affect the overall balance, right? And therefore, what we see is that after the readjustment which was done on the basis of 2020 census, almost 37 states out of the total states had the same numbers of seats which was given to them. So we have EU, that is European Union Parliament. So it has 720 members, and seats are divided between the 27 member countries on the basis of the principle of digressive proportionality. That is the ratio between the total number of seats and the population of a country is it is equal to that of the rate of the population growth, right? So again, what ultimately happens is a balance is maintained. Now, what can be the way forward with respect to the delimitation debate going on in the country? The very first is extend the freeze on delimitation. So what was done by former Prime Ministers Indira Gandhi or Atal Bihari Vajpayee, you can continue to do the same thing. That is, you basically freeze the total number of seats. Do not increase it to any further. Next is permanently freeze the seat redistribution. So in the first case, you can freeze the total number of seats, but you can have the redistribution. But in the second case, what you are doing is that do not do the redistribution also. That is the total number of seats as well as the seats which are actually allocated to different states. It has to remain the same, which it is right now. Next is balance delimitation with that of decentralization. What we are trying to say is it's fine. You continue with the delimitation aspect on the basis of the current numbers, the population numbers. But why we are not focusing upon more important aspect of decentralization? That is, why can't we transfer some of the subjects which are mentioned in the union list to that of the state list, so that the states are in a better position to implement those policies on the ground, to implement more effectively on the ground? Or why can't we make the third tier, that is the panchayat or the municipalities, more strong? Why can't we, we have the 11th schedule or the 12th schedule, which deal with the power and the responsibilities of panchayats and municipalities respectively? Why can't we allow these the third tier of the government to exercise more power? So this is an aspect which has to be catered to. Increase the number of seats in each state. What we are trying to say is that you keep the total number of seats fixed for Lok Sabha and the Raj Sabha, but increase the number of seats for the legislative assemblies, so that we can have more participation, more representation. See, what we're trying to say is definitely delimitation is something which is a contentious topic, which is a debatable topic, but 3 points must be kept in mind. The very first is that the southern states who have really invested a lot when we talk about the human capital, they should not be disincentivized. Rather, they should be incentivized. Second aspect is the aspect of federalism. We have to make sure that the different political constituents, that is the different states around the country, they should feel that they have equal political power. A particular state should not have some privileges, or a particular state should not have some advantages over the other. Next aspect is that we should have a proper stakeholder approach. That is, whenever we are talking about delimitation, it should not be a top-down approach, right? So the union government should come in consultation with the states and accordingly come to a particular conclusion. That is what you have to know with respect to this particular article. Let's have a mains practice question. The upcoming delimitation exercise in India is expected to address the demographic shifts, but also raises concerns over the federal balance and representation, critically examine the key issues and challenges associated with the delimitation, and suggest measures to ensure equitable representation while maintaining political stability. 15 marks, 250 words. Do write a particular answer on this question. And yes, if you're liking the initiative, do press the like button and let us know through your comments. All right, let's go to the next topic. So coming to the next topic, we have the new oil, that is critical minerals. So we have this particular column which has been featured in the Indian Express. Now in this particular column, the author is basically looking at the importance of the critical minerals from the special perspective of geopolitics, specifically the Russia-Ukraine war. And it is asking India that India should step up or open up the exploration of critical minerals to protect its strategic interests. So we will see what critical minerals are all about, what is the distribution of critical minerals around the world, and what should be the way forward. This is with respect to GS3, mobilization of resources, and science and technology. Whenever we talk about critical minerals, see, the word is critical. Obviously, it means important. Important in which context, right? So again, critical minerals, that there is no specific definition. There's no particular definition which tells us what do we mean by critical mineral. Different countries around the world have their own criteria, right? So for instance, US may have a list of its own critical minerals. India, on the other hand, may have its own list of critical minerals. Different countries may have their own list. Now, either these minerals can be metallic or they can be non-metallic, right? Now, they have primarily two specific characteristics, what you must always know. The very first is essentiality, also what we call as the economic importance. That is, for specific sector, they are of prime importance. Whenever we talk about the specific sector, what we are actually referring here is to the technological domain. That is, when we talk about the new and emerging technologies, we have some of these critical minerals which are very, very important, which are of prime importance. Be it the space exploration, be it the defense, or be it the electric vehicles, whatever, be it the basic electronic items. So they are of quite prime importance when we talk about their application, right? And therefore, the essentiality aspect becomes quite important. Next is supply chain risks. Whenever we are talking about supply chain risks, what we are referring to is that the location of the production of these critical minerals, it is very specific around the globe. It's not like all the countries around the world are basically producing these critical minerals. Next aspect is not just production. Next aspect is that of the processing capacity. So the processing of these critical minerals is far more complex than the production aspect, right? So when we look at the processing aspect, this is more complex, and therefore there are supply chain risks which are involved. So combining these two characteristics, we have the criticality of the minerals. So therefore we define how much critical, or what is the criticality of a particular mineral with respect to its essentiality, its importance, or with respect to its supply chain. I hope this is clear. Now, as I said, the criticality of minerals is different for different countries. Also, it changes with time. For example, in the 1950s, for a particular country like USA, maybe a particular element, a particular mineral was more important at that period of time in comparison to how much importance it is having at right now, right? So right now, a particular mineral or particular element may be more important for US in comparison to a particular element which was quite more important in 1950s, right? So it varies with time. Now, what can be the different examples of critical minerals? So we can have antimony, we can have beryllium, we can have bismuth, cobalt, copper, gallium, germanium, lithium, vanadium, different types. Now, what are the applications of these critical minerals? So the very first is used to manufacture advanced technologies. See, we have different sectors where different countries are focusing upon. For instance, India right now is focusing upon the space exploration or the aerospace industries, or it is focusing upon the indigenous development of defense platform. In all these advanced industries or advanced technological domain, we have the utmost requirement of these critical minerals. Next is use in low emission technologies. Take the case of the manufacturing of solar panels or modules. Take the case of the manufacture of wind turbines, or take the case of battery storage systems. All these things require critical minerals. Then we have, some of them are also crucial for common products. You must have seen steel utensils. So steel require alloys. Steel requires chromium, right? So that is a critical mineral, right? So even for some of the very common products, you must have seen a normal radio working, right? So radio also has some of these minerals. Be it small components in howsoever small amount, but it definitely has, be it the transistors or the capacitors used, right, or the wiring part, definitely it has some amount of critical minerals, which all are the top producers. Now this list is basically not something which is in the hierarchy. If we talk about the country which is basically producing the most amount of critical minerals, it is China, right? Again, understand that whenever we talk about the production aspect, China is actually having a dominance of almost 60 to 65% with respect to the production aspect. Whenever we talk about the processing aspect of these critical minerals, China basically has a dominance of almost 75 to 80% of the processing aspect, right? So do remember. Then we have some other countries like Chile, Indonesia, Congo, Australia, South Africa. Now this is a very good map. Again, this becomes quite important. I'll tell you why. Because we had a particular question in the prelims with respect to a particular country, right? So this becomes quite important and we'll have a discussion. So if you just look at the global critical mineral production on the basis of the 2019 numbers, you can just see in Canada, we have the production of cesium, which is basically used in medical imaging. You must have seen the CT scan machines, right? Or the other equipments used in medical diagnostics. So cesium is used. Almost 55% of the global production is with Canada. Next, you have potash, which is used in fertilizers. Almost 32% is in Canada. Then let's talk about USA. So beryllium, the dominance of US when we talk about beryllium is almost 65%. For helium, which is used in cryogenics, it is 55%. Beryllium is again used in industrial components. Let's talk about Chile. So Chile produces rhenium, right? Now this is used in turbine engine components, right? So very important for hydropower generation. Almost 55% of rhenium is basically sourced from Chile, right? Then you have Brazil. When we talk about niobium, which is used in steel alloys, almost 88%. Then we have South Africa over here. Look at this, platinum, which is used in catalytic converters. Then we've got chromium used in steel alloys. Then we've got manganese, again used in steel alloys. We have 71, 39 and 29%. Look at this, we have Spain, strontium, right? We have, which is basically used in ceramic magnets, almost 41%. Talk about Democratic Republic of Congo, cobalt, almost 70%. Almost 70% of the world's production is basically coming out from Congo. Then tantalum, used in capacitor, very important component of electronics. Then let's talk about Australia, lithium, almost 54%. Then zirconium, 38%, used in foundry, zirconium, and then lithium, used in ceramics and glass, also used in batteries. Look at this, China. Look at the number of critical minerals which are basically present in China. Gallium, which is used in integrated circuits. Then tungsten. Then we have bismuth, germanium, antimony, graphite, rare earth elements, tellurium, fluorspar. Different list. Look at the percentage, 96%, 83%, 73%. So what we see is China is having a dominant position, not just with respect to the production aspect, but also with respect to the processing ability. And therefore, what we are trying to focus, what also US is also trying to focus, can be very important for the upcoming prelims, the Mineral Security Partnership, which the US has come up with, different countries, which focuses upon the rare earth elements, including the light as well as heavy rare earth elements, right? So as to ensure a proper, a robust supply chain with respect to these rare earth elements. Now, when we talk about the critical minerals in India, we have the Ministry of Mines, which has identified 30 critical minerals. Are there some factors which have been considered? Yes, definitely. What are the factors? The very first is their disruption potential. Are they having disruption potential or not? Second is, when we talk about, is the import reliance. How much reliance we are having upon the import. Next aspect is substitutability. whether that particular critical mineral is substitutable or not. Next aspect is usability, in which all fields it is usable. So primarily there are 4 factors. So Ministry of Mines has come up and identified certain critical minerals. Some of them are antimony, beryllium, bismuth, cobalt, copper, gallium, germanium, lithium. Now, what is the significance of critical minerals for India? Again, almost the same reasons which we mentioned at the very start. The very first is economic development. India is witnessing substantive progress when we talk about the services sector or the manufacturing aspect. We are integrating a lot of technologies, right? We are making the supply chains more automatic. We are basically investing in a lot of technologies, and all this require the utility of critical minerals, right? So be it the new and emerging technologies, be it the computers, be it the high processing computers, or be it different electronic equipments, all require the critical minerals, and this is very important for the overall economic development of the country. Next is national security. Why national security? India is basically focusing upon its own space missions. India is focusing upon the indigenous defense platforms. India is now becoming a hub for defense exports. So therefore, this becomes quite important for India. Also, you must have seen that in the Kargil war, India was quite dependent upon the US GPS, and US in fact stopped helping India. So this is an area which is quite strategic for India, and India needs to be basically self-reliant when we talk about these strategic aspects, and over here the critical minerals play a very important role. Next is environmental sustainability. Again, the same reason that if we see, again, we have basically decided to make India a net zero country by 2070, and this requires the integration of various low emission technologies, be it the solar technology, be it the wind technology, be it the other technologies. So all require these critical minerals, right? Next is, what are the concerns related to the critical minerals in the India? The very first is India has very few domestic reserves. Definitely in Jammu Kashmir before few years we came across the lithium reserves. Very good news. But overall, in comparison to countries like China, we have very minuscule amount of these reserves. Next is increasing demand for minerals. As we are having the growth of different industries, for example, we recently instituted a semiconductor facility in Gujarat, or we have one of the largest smartphone manufacturing plant in Noida, right? So as we are expanding these industrial bases, we require more of these critical minerals. Next is the challenges posed by China. So China is using its own reserves strategically, right? So just before a few days, we had a particular news where China stopped the supply of some of the very important critical minerals to the US, primarily because US imposed a lot of tariffs on Chinese imports. So therefore, what we have is the same situation can be there for India also, right? Where China stops the supply of these critical minerals to India, and we are quite dependent upon these imports. So that can be a possible security challenge for India. Next is lack of processing and manufacturing. Again, we don't have the adequate reserves, we know that. But even for the limited amount of productions we have, we don't have the adequate processing capacity. So that is something which is quite concerning. Now, if you just look at this particular table, that how much we are dependent upon different countries. For lithium, almost 100% we are dependent, right? And the countries are Chile, Russia, China, Ireland. Then for cobalt, almost 100%. For nickel, almost 100%. Vanadium, almost 100%. Niobium, same, 100%. So look at this. We are almost dependent for all these critical minerals. We are 100% dependent on different countries, right? So this is a very strategic situation or a very concerning situation for India, and therefore there is a need to diversify the supply chains and to focus upon the exploration part, as the author is also talking about in this particular article. What are the steps required? The assessment of availability and accessibility. How is that possible? That when we have substantive funding with respect to the exploration part, we should explore more and more number of reserves. And then if we come across a particular reserve, we should come up with a particular technique, more sustainable technique to exploit that particular mineral. Then significant investments in infrastructure, research and development and policy support is needed for various industries around the country so that they can come up with different techniques of producing these critical minerals, producing and processing these critical minerals. Setting up a specialized body. We have a particular body, CSIRO in Australia, which focuses specifically upon these critical minerals. So what we can do is we can basically set up a center of excellence in Ministry of Mines that specifically looks into this aspect of critical minerals. So again, what we are saying is Definitely, as we progress, as these sectors, we make advances in different fields, be it space exploration, be it aerospace, be it defense, be it electronic equipments, be it smartphone manufacturing or anything, we need to have a proper diversified supply chain of these critical minerals, a more sustainable production pattern for these critical minerals, and therefore we need to adequately invest in this aspect. That is what the author is also talking about. So this is what you need to know with respect to this article. Let's have a mains practice question. Critical minerals are essential for India's economic security and technological advancement. Discuss the significance of critical minerals in the context of India's energy transition and industrial growth. Also examine the challenges associated with the availability and suggest measures to ensure a sustainable supply. Right? So do write a particular answer on this question. We also have a particular prelims question recently asked, and the question says about 3/4 of the world's cobalt, a metal required for the manufacture of batteries for electric motor vehicles, is produced by Argentina, Botswana, Democratic Republic of Congo, or Kazakhstan. Do let me know the answer in the comment section. Let's have the simplified section now. So coming to the simplified section, we have the first topic, which is with respect to the ethanol blending program. Now, we all know that ethanol blending program is one of the very important programs by the government of India, where the government is trying to blend ethanol with that of petrol, so that to reduce the overall emissions, to reduce the dependence of India on the other countries for the crude oil. Now, in this article, what the author is trying to point towards is the issues which are there with respect to this particular ethanol program. There are primarily 3 issues which are being highlighted in this particular article. So if there's a possible question which talks about the ethanol blending program, you can very well use these 3 issues. The very first issue which the author is trying to highlight is that we have these ethanol producing facilities which produce a lot of emissions. For example, formaldehyde, acetaldehyde. Now, they are a source of pollution for that particular local environment, right? Second is that the kind of water consumption which these particular production facilities are having is too much. So they are using a lot of water, a lot of fresh water, which is basically, ideally, which is meant for the human use or for the agriculture. So again, this is quite a water guzzling activity. Next aspect, third aspect is that many of the effluents, many of the discharge of these particular plants, it is basically going into the rivers, the local rivers and canals, which is having a disastrous impact on the local biodiversity. So this is the particular gist of the article, and this is what the author is talking about. Quite important. Also gives certain numbers. We'll have a look. So if we talk about ethanol, so it is one of the principal biofuels. The formula, the chemical formula is C2H5OH. Again, produced either naturally by fermentation of sugar, or it can be produced by petrochemical reaction, that is ethylene hydration. So when we are talking about the ethanol production, we are using different sources. Either it can be sugar, either it can be starch, or either it can be cellulose, right? And then you have the plant, and then it basically goes to the gas station. Now, the blending target is almost 20% of the ethanol blending by 2025. Significance, reduce the oil imports. Definitely, if we'll have our own production of ethanol, if we'll blend it with the petrol, we'll require less of crude oil from the different countries around the world, and it would reduce our, basically, the kind of resources we are spending for getting those crude oil. Equivalent efficiency at a lower cost than petrol. Burns completely and cleaner. So we have the cleaning burning which is associated. Next, ethanol produced from farm residue to boost the farmer's income. So we also focus upon doubling the farmer's income, right? So in this case, the farmers have the other revenue also, so as to contribute to the ethanol production. What are the challenges? High land requirement, high water requirement, which is one of the aspects which is there in this article. And then we have related initiatives, for example, roadmap for ethanol blending in India. So this was the report by Niti Aayog. Then E100 pilot project. So we are, in some cases, what we have done is 100% on ethanol. We have these automobiles which are running. Then Pradhan Mantri Jeevan Yojana, then which basically aims to focus upon boosting the 2G ethanol products. Then the national policy on biofuels, very important, of 2018. Now, what this particular article, as I've already told you in the beginning, says is that we have the ethanol blending program, and different scientists and farmers are saying that water resources are being depleted and emissions from factories are polluting the air or the water or the soil of the surrounding regions. Ethanol blending program introduced in India as a pilot project in 2001, a central government in 2020 advanced the target of 20% ethanol blending petrol from 2030 to 25. So the target has been basically advanced. The EBP program, ethanol blending program, is a way of addressing the multiple concern: growing energy consumption, oil imports, increasing carbon emissions from vehicles. Under the ethanol blending program, the ethanol is made using grains such as broken rice and corn, and is therefore said to double farmers' income. Now, as of 2024, blend percent was 15%, and the target is basically to go to 20% by 2025. To meet the required target of 20% in petrol by 2025-26, 1,016 crore liters of ethanol would be required. Very, very large amount. The center announced a relaxation in the application processes for the environmental clearances. So in order to boost the production, what the government did was that if someone wants to set up a particular facility for the ethanol production, so the requirements for the environmental clearances are quite less, and therefore someone can easily set up a particular production facility. And also offered subsidies on purchase of grains to ensure a smoother process for ethanol factories. Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Haryana, Punjab have the highest number of ethanol factories in the country, contributing to a substantial portion of the overall production capacity of 947 crore liters in 2022. So we have, just remember these states can be quite important when in the prelims exam. Since 2024, there have been continuous protests in different villages in Andhra Pradesh against the particular ethanol blending program. All villages are located near a river or a canal, which is the source of drinking water and the agriculture needs. Again, that is being polluted because of the effluents being discharged from these production facilities. Factory producing ethanol effluents were being discharged into nearby canal. Now, much of the confusion regarding how polluting an ethanol plant can be arises from the fact that environmental clearances do not mention the emission to begin with. So there are no set standards which are to be followed, right? So this is a very big concern. Experts say that hazardous cancer-causing chemicals, for example, acetaldehyde, formaldehyde, and acrolein are some of the emissions from the ethanol factories. So do remember, there can be a possible question in the prelims that these are the chemicals which are discharged from the ethanol blending factories. Don't find a mention in the clearances given. All ethanol production plants and distilleries fall under the red category, which means that they have a pollution score of 60 or more. So don't think that ethanol production facilities are something which are very clean. They are also producing a lot of emissions, right? That is the kind of irony we have. But to facilitate a smoother and quicker clearance process, the center has allowed them to be set up without public hearings. So again, the government wants to increase the blending target, and therefore it is basically relaxing the norms which are to be followed by different industries. Farmers also fear that the water guzzling factories will leave them with no water for their crops. Scientists for the People, a particular initiative, had said that a grain-based ethanol factory requires almost 8 to 12 liters of water per liter of ethanol. So if you want to produce a liter of ethanol, you require almost 8 to 12 liters of water. Very water guzzling initiative, a particular enterprise. Flow in the perennial rivers such as Krishna being lean for most of the year, the factories depend upon groundwater. And this is the contravention for the rule. So you don't have sources, you don't have adequate sources of water. So these particular entities, these particular enterprises, ethanol production facilities, they are actually extracting the groundwater. And this is also having the effect on the aquifers. A Niti Aayog report said that when the petrol was blended with 20% of the biofuels, carbon monoxide overall, it reduced by 30% in four-wheelers and 50% in two-wheelers. Now, this is a benefit we already know. But what the scientists are saying is, an environmentalist asked of what is the use of this particular program, ethanol blending program, if the gains achieved are negated by the harmful chemicals released into the atmosphere during the process. So there has to be a proper debate. There has to be a discussion that are there any benefits of ethanol blending program? Are we heading in the right direction? That is a question which has to be asked. The government would do well to listen to the concerns and adopt corrective measures. So we are not saying that don't go with the ethanol blending program, but there have to be adequate standards which have to be followed. There have to be these environmental clearances should be given on proper parameters, right? And again, when we talk about the effluents, they cannot be directly dumped into the river. So this is what the article is, can be quite important, right? Let's go to the other article. So coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the Gharial, which is a critically endangered species. Now we have the Madhya Pradesh Chief Minister who has released 10 gharials into the Chambal River. So we many times have this question, this doubt in the mind that which all species are important. So this species naturally become important because it has a particular initiative has been taken by a state government and has been featured in the news. So this becomes quite important. So we have the Madhya Pradesh Chief Minister has released 10 gharials, a critically endangered species, into the Chambal River at the National Chambal Gharial Sanctuary in Morena. So just do remember that where this is located. Madhya Pradesh had led a decades-long effort for the crocodilians conservation. Today, more than 80% of India's gharial population lives in the state. Very important data, right? So almost more than 80% of the total number of gharials in the country are in the state of Madhya Pradesh. So we have the Gavalius gangeticus, a long-snouted fish-eating crocodilian. Just look at this. So it has a quite long snout. The name gharial comes from the Hindi word ghada, which means pot in Hindi, referring to the bulbous snout tip of the adult male. Just look at this. So it's a bulbous snout tip which is there, right? So therefore, the name is Gharial, right? Which resembles an inverted pot. Gharials are sacred in Indian mythology. See, these are the statements which directly come in the UPSC. So please do pay attention. Often depicted as the divine mount of goddess Ganga. To remember, their slender snouts lined with numerous sharp interlocking teeth are adapted to trap fish, the mainstay of their diet. Males grow from 3 to 6 meters and females from 2.6 to 4.5 meters. Sandbanks and islands are critical to their ecology, serving as the preferred sites for basking and nesting. So they need a specific site for basking and nesting, and which is the sandbanks. Between March to May, as rivers level recede, females gharials climb onto exposed sandbanks and islands to nest communally. Gharials play an important role in the river's ecosystem, cleaning up the carrion. Now, what is carrion? This is the dead material which comes from the fish bodies, the flesh of the dead animals, right? So they play a very important role in the cleansing aspect also. So they clean the river ecosystem also. Why did the CM release a gharial in the river? So we have the Chief Minister who has released the 10 gharials to bolster the population of gharials in the state. Madhya Pradesh boasts the highest number of gharials in India, with 2024 census recording almost 2,456 individuals in the Chambal Sanctuary alone, attributed to the decades of conservation work following a national decline of more than 80% in the gharial population between 1950s and 60s. So MP has relatively played a very important role in the overall conservation of these gharials. A species is likely extinct in Myanmar and Bhutan, with only small uncertain populations remaining in Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh and Upper Brahmaputra. Next aspect is, what are the different threats do gharials face? So gharial population has declined due to overhunting. This is one of the prime reasons. Prized for their skin, eggs and as trophies. Today, dam construction, irrigation, canals, siltation, river course changes, embankments, sand mining, pollution and fishing are some of the threats that gharials face. Gillnets kill gharials of all sizes. So these are some of the threats which are posed to their very existence. Do have a reading. Now, what are the conservation efforts? So between 1975 till 1982, India established 16 captive breeding and release centers, right? And 5 gharial sanctuaries. So we have first the National Chambal Sanctuary, which is in Madhya Pradesh. Then we have got Katarnia Ghat Sanctuary, which is in Uttar Pradesh. Then we've got Chitwan National Park, which is in Nepal. Son River Sanctuary, which is in Madhya Pradesh. And then we have Satkosia Gods Sanctuary, which is in Odisha. Conservation efforts include captive breeding programs to rear and release the hatchlings back into the river, monitoring the populations, actively managing the threats such as sand mining, engaging local communities in the overall preservation. So this particular species can be really important, and a possible question in the prelims can come. Let's go to the other article. So coming to the next article, this is with respect to the United Nations peacekeeping. So what you must understand here is that we have different conflict-prone regions around the world, and over there is a requirement of certain people as peacekeepers. Now, which UN agency has the authority to mandate the deployment of these peacekeepers? So we have the United Nations Security Council. Always remember, India as a contributing nation to the peacekeeping effort, what you must know is it is one of the largest contributors to the overall peacekeepers around the world. And therefore, we have the UN officials who basically have talked about, who have appreciated India's effort in the overall peacekeeping. Next aspect is that India is also one of the country who basically started an all-women contingent as peacekeepers in the country of Liberia, right? So we have a particular UN official who is basically who has praised India's efforts with respect to the peacekeeping. Indian peacekeepers are present in most of our peacekeeping missions, and they are serving with commitment. The Under Secretary General for the UN peacekeeping operations has said this. Peacekeeping missions in the Democratic Republic of Congo is facing restrictions, especially in the areas controlled by M23 rebels. There can be a possible question in the prelims which says, what does the term M23 means, right? To which country it is referring to. So do remember. So we have this official who is participating in a particular conference which is titled as Women in Peacekeeping, a Global South Perspective, organized on February 24-25 by the Ministry of External Affairs in collaboration with Ministry of Defense and the Center for UN Peacekeeping, which brought together women peacekeepers from India and 35 other countries. Mr. Lecroy said that there's a need for reforms in the international governance. Whenever we talk about India has been stressing upon this, that there has to be a proper reform, especially when we talk about the United Nations Security Council, to make it more representative and to make it more reflective of today's reality, not the realities of 1945, post-World War. On the situation in the Congo, where the M23 has been gaining territory, he said that the situation remains very concerning. The M23 is supported by the armed forces of Rwanda, and the situation is having a very negative impact on the population. India has traditionally, now this information is quite important, India has traditionally been the top troop contributing nations to the United Nations. Very important, again I'm stressing, as on October 2024, peacekeepers, India had a total of 5,466 peacekeepers, of which 5,046 were military personnel, making it the fourth largest troop contributing nation after Nepal, Rwanda, and Bangladesh. Do remember, India is the fourth largest troop contributing nation. Let's talk about the peacekeeping. So all decisions, as I've already told you in the beginning, all decisions with respect to the peacekeeping are basically taken by the United Nations Security Council. This is outlined in the United Nations Charter itself, which grants the Security Council the sole responsibility to maintain international peace and security. The financing of the UN peacekeeping operations is collective responsibility of all the UN member states. It's not like only some countries contribute. Every member state is legally obligated to pay their respective share towards peacekeeping. This is under the provisions, again, under the provisions of Charter of the United Nations. The contribution of the member countries to the United Nations peacekeeping force has no effect on their voting power in the UNGA, which is same for all. That is one vote for every country. In 2007, India became the first country to deploy an all-women contingent to the United Nations peacekeeping mission, that is in Liberia. India has been one of the largest troop contributors to the United Nations mission since its inception, and now stands at 4th place in the world. So this information can be really important for your prelims. Let's go to the other article. So coming to the next article, this is with respect to the very important body, the Enforcement Directorate. So what we have been seeing is that the ED has been conducting searches at many locations with respect to those places who have been allegedly involved in forging the fake visas for the US. So we have been seeing that US is deporting a lot of Indians because they illegally entered into the country. So therefore, we have the ED who is conducting these searches. Now, ED, the Directorate of Enforcement, becomes a very, very important body. And again, it is performing quite well in the last few years. So again, what we are trying to focus upon is that what the body is all about and what are the different provisions. So we have the Directorate of Enforcement, or the ED. It's a multidisciplinary organization mandated with the investigation of economic crimes and violations of foreign exchange laws. Just remember that whenever we talk about the Enforcement Directorate, it is the enforcement agency with respect to three laws. The very first is Prevention of Money Laundering Act, right, which obviously deals with the aspect of money laundering. Then we have second, the Foreign Exchange Management Act, which deals with maintaining the stability of the foreign exchange. Then third is the Fugitive Economic Offenders Act of 2018. So it is primarily the agency which is enforcing these three laws of the Government of India, right? Now, the origin of the Directorate goes back to 1956, when it was actually established as enforcement unit under the Department of Economic Affairs. So initially, it was under the Department of Economic Affairs. And then it dealt with the cases for the violation with respect to the laws of FERA, Foreign Exchange Regulation Act of 47, which was actually replaced by FEMA, Foreign Exchange Management Act of 1999. In the year 1957, the unit was renamed as Enforcement Directorate. Again, I've already told you, it basically enforces 3 acts of the government of India. Then, whenever any offence is registered by a local police station, let's say you have a particular offence which is registered, and the investigation officers, if he or she comes to the conclusion that the proceeds of the crime are more than 1 crore, so that particular investigation officer would automatically send the file to the Enforcement Directorate. Otherwise, what would happen is that if the Enforcement Directorate comes to know on its own that there is a particular activity which is taking place, so the Enforcement Directorate can basically call for the FIR which is registered with respect to that particular case. So we have, whenever an offence is registered by a local police station which has generated a proceeds of crime over and above 1 crore, the investigation officer forwards the details to the Enforcement Directorate. Alternatively, if the offence comes under the knowledge of central agency, they can then call for the first investigation report. In 1960, the administrative control of the Directorate was transferred from the Department of Economic Affairs to the Department of Revenue. For some time, it was also under the Department of Personnel and Training. Presently, please remember that the Directorate of Enforcement, the ED, works under the overall administrative control of Department of Revenue. Do remember, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Maybe a question can be asked in the prelims with respect to the overall jurisdiction, right? So this is what you need to know. Let's go to the last article of the day. So coming to the last article of the day, this is with respect to the National Assessment and Accreditation Council. So we recently saw before a few days that CBI started a particular inquiry with respect to the NAAC and KLEF corruption case, where a particular educational institute was basically giving bribes in exchange for A++ rating. So what we have been seeing is this is particularly an aspect where we have the NAAC, which is actually has removed a lot of assessors. Assessors are those people who are involved in the rating process. So it has basically done an audit and then came to the conclusion that there are many people who are basically involved in this illicit activity, and therefore we have removed them. So what the article says is that the NAAC has removed 900 peer assessors from the evaluation duty. These assessors were responsible for evaluating the higher education institutions in the course of grading institutions. Please understand that government is really focusing a lot upon the grading of the higher institutes in the country. But if we have these instances where the rating is given on the basis of bribes, so this is something which is a black spot on the overall higher education. And this is something which is obviously very bad. And moreover, what you must know is that NAAC is an autonomous agency. So we really cannot expect these activities from a body which is autonomous. While the review of the work and conduct of assessors has been going on for 18 months, the recent case of NAAC and Koneru Lakshmaya Educational Foundation corruption case in Andhra Pradesh speeded up this particular process of removal of these assessors who were allegedly involved in the illicit activities of corruption. There were some irregularities like traveling a day before. So what they used to do was that they used to travel a day before the evaluation, providing incorrect information to us, going on to their choice of institutions and so on. So they used to go to specific places, not the ones which were told by the NAAC. The Central Bureau of Investigation, the CBI, launched a particular investigation in the alleged bribery of the NAAC team by a Guntur-based KLEF in exchange for A++ rating for the university. 7 peer assessors concerned were debarred. Now, this is important. Please understand. We have the NAAC, which is a part of the University Grants Commission. So do remember, NAAC, an autonomous body under UGC. Please remember, has recently undertaken substantial reforms to enhance the integrity and transparency of its accreditation process. So therefore, accreditation obviously becomes very important, especially when the country is focusing a lot upon enhancing the quality of its higher education, right? So let's have a reading of NAAC. So again, NAAC, what is actually NAAC? The National Assessment and Accreditation Council. It's a government organization which is headquartered in Bengaluru, established in 1994 in a response to the recommendation of National Policy on Education of 1986. It is an autonomous body that assesses and accredits the higher education institutions such as the colleges, universities, or other recognized institutions. You must have seen in your colleges that a particular team, a NAAC team is visiting, and then the accreditation is taking place, right? To derive the understanding of the quality status of the institution. It is funded and it is a part of the UGC, always remember, and evaluates the institutions in terms of their performance related to the teaching, learning process, faculty. What are the different parameters which are considered? The first is the teaching learning process, the learning outcomes, faculty, research, infrastructure, governance, financial well-being, student services. So there are different factors on the basis of which a particular grading is done. What is the NAAC's accreditation process? So the first step involves an applicant institution submitting a self-study report. So first, there is a self-study report by the institution based on quantitative and qualitative metrics. The data is subjected to validation by the expert teams of NAAC with quality reviewed during its site visit. Over here, the assessors play a very important role. And if these assessors are involved in a particular corruption, obviously, this would not reflect the true grading of the institutions. According to the Government of India, of the 1,113 universities and around 44,000 colleges in the All India Survey on Higher Education report, the NAAC accredited 418 universities and 9,000 colleges as on January 1st, 2023. So this is a very, very important institution, autonomous body under the University Grants Commission, and involves in the accreditation process. That's all for today. I hope you really enjoyed the session. All the very best. And if you really like the session, do let us know through your likes and comments. Thank you so much. All the best.